Hi everyone, let's talk about Lignum, which is a really fantastic design. There's so many moving parts to it that really make a huge difference to things that at first glance don't seem like that big of a deal, like the planned work phase or the tasks and things. They are such a huge part of it if you can leverage them right, and that's what this game is all about. It's all about planning and trying to work out turns and turns and rounds in advance to try and maximize your potential, and not just that, not just to do well, but to avoid messing up, because it's a game with a lot of pitfalls. There are so many different choices to make, not just in moving along the supply path, in which forest you're going to go for to begin with, which is a secret before everybody reveals where they're going. Everybody could go for the same place, really, and sometimes that might be the only viable option. There might only end up a couple of places with decent wood in there, and everything else has just got one firewood in there. So it drives everybody together to end up going for the same thing, which leads to the supply path becoming more of a race, and which then leads to, okay, then I'm going to pay to go for this one that somebody else chose, but they're still on the supply path because they thought they were safe, and now I'm going to pay and go into theirs instead, and now they're going to have to worry about what to do because they haven't got any money left. There's so many different ways that this can go, and so many really tough choices to make, because you are making decisions, especially early on when you're deciding on bearers and woodcutters and things. You're making decisions on usually imperfect information, because unless you are, the sole people that are going in these areas, you are having to base it off, well, I am going for a place that's ended up with 5 wood pieces in it, and it's all amazing, and I can't wait, and I need loads of bearers, I need loads of woodcutters to pull all of this off, but somebody else chose that as well. And if they might just get to the woodcutters section and just skip to the end to try and just get it against all odds, and then do things with it in future rounds. And then I'm left with 5 woodcutters, and the next available thing's only got 1 wood in it, and so all of these things go to waste. You don't really save. You don't save people. You can save equipment if that doesn't work out, but you can't save the people over future rounds. And that can happen with your planned work as well. If you'd worked this out to do your soaring in a particular round, but you hadn't built it up in advance, and you were going to grab all of the things in one go, and then you had all the things worked out, you'd had just enough money to grab all the sawyers and the saws they need, and you had the extra huts to get loads of, and you're going to be cutting up 8 pieces of wood into things at once, and you're going to have just an enormous turn. But then somebody goes and takes that wood from you, and now you can't take any, and now there's no point you getting all of those sawyers, because you're only going to get 2 wood, and you can only leverage it a tiny little bit. And it's still kind of effective, but nowhere near as effective as it could be if you get the proper planning and then manage to race along this path. I think there is a ton of strategy in this game. Even more, there's an expansion. I didn't even mention, there's a little expansion in the box that adds buildings and joiners and things. So even more, variability and depth to the game once you add those in there. But I think there is plenty in just the game itself. This is, by the way, the Capstone Games version that's got the expansion built in. I'm not sure if that's in the original version. So yeah, really a lot to like about the game, and a ton of depth and weight to everything that's going on in it. There's a few issues with it. The rulebook is not particularly clear. It's certain, by no means anywhere near the worst rulebook. You can get a lot of the game out of it, but there are kind of assumptions you have to make. And Board Game Geek, as always, very helpful when people have had questions in the past. It's just not clear. I don't think it ever leaves massive things out. It does leave some things out, like I was talking to Paul Grogan before I even got it, and he'd looked at it, and it's when it talks about the supply path, it says that everybody picks a space in the supply path, and then it starts talking about the other rounds. It doesn't have the part in the rules where it should say, and then keep going until everybody's finished on the supply path, which is a thing that you can kind of intuit based on having played a lot of games, but really, when rules have to include the basics like put the game board on the table, it's helpful to have keep going, keep taking turns. But anyway, that's just a thing of, it's you're gonna need to put a little bit of extra work into this rulebook. It's not the best. at being just very clear. And it could do with a little player aid as well. It's nice that it's got these tracks up here to remind you of the phases that you're in, but for the phases that don't involve the woodcutting phase, like what you put out each round and how many cards to draw, and just the basic sequence, and maybe a little player aid is to remind you that, to remind everybody that, you know, to transport by the river, it's 1 wood per raft you're using, and you need a bearer with that. And then for the wagon, you need a bearer, a fodder, and a wagon. And the fodder slides along, the wagon gets used up. There's a lot of little things like that, little rules that are very particular to each section that it would be nice to have a little extra player aid for. But obviously that's just an initial downside, and once you have got the basic flow of the game down, you know, it all runs smoothly and it all stays the same throughout the game as well. Winter is a little bit of an anomaly, but there's not that much to it as well. There's, unless people have really planned ahead, which you're supposed to, then you're not going to get as much done as you would in a general phase anyway. So the downsides I've got for the game are, even though there is variability with, you know, there's that expansion, there are a lot of different task cards, I haven't got the extra ones here, but there are more planned work cards than this, and they're not all going to come out in one game, and you know, which ones are available are going to really affect it, because these can be really big deals. I don't think I leverage them as much as I could have in the playthrough, but you know, there's a lot to think about in this game. Even though there is that kind of variability, I'm not sure how different every game would feel for us. Especially as a 2-player game, and I've said this before and others have said it in better ways, that in a 2-player game, when a lot of the kind of random chaos of other players are taken out of the mix, it is easier to do similar things. The game does a very good job of driving players together to go to the same woodcutting areas, because there's still 6 areas in a 2-player game, just as there are in every other game. But in the normal, in a 4-player game, you draw 3 of these cards every round and fill up the woodcutting areas. In a 2-player game, you only fill up 1, which is hardly anything usually. You know, sometimes, as you saw in the playthrough, it's only a couple of bits of wood in 2 areas. And that inevitably drives everybody together, because there might only be one place that's got a decent amount of wood, which is the place that everybody needs to go to, and then there's going to be a race. There is, though, more likelihood, you know, sometimes depending on how that card comes out, it can be that 2 are equally good, and especially in the first game that we played, it was like that. There were a lot of times where it was just kind of either or. It didn't really matter which one we picked, and it was kind of a decision of like, oh, this is just kind of luck. We've got 2 basically the same areas, and if we both go for the same one, now we're going to fight over it, and one of us is going to have to pay our money, even though it's the same thing. But that's just as an aside. If you do have that situation and you've picked 2 different spaces anyway, the race here is taken out of it a lot. You know, some of these tokens you'll really want to go for, and maybe if your plan relies on a wagon, there'll be a bit of a race for the fodder and wherever the wagon token has landed, and that can drive a little bit of it. But the main thrust of this supply phase, I think, all comes from when you have people that are vying for the same area, and there is that life or death thing, because, as I said earlier on, if you have spent loads of money on bearers and fodder and woodcutters and all of this, and then you don't get there first, and somebody else sneaks in ahead, and you have to go to a completely different area, those people will be wasted, unless, you know, you can think of another way of using some of them. But you know, if you've bought a ton of woodcutters because there's a ton of wood there, and somebody sneaks in underneath you and manages to take it away, those woodcutters are wasted. That money is wasted, those points are wasted, and your plan, you know, is completely out of skew then. So that is, I think, the drive for that, and it's more likely in a 2-player game that isn't going to happen. Even though, as I said, it does a good job of trying to drive you together, it can't always do that. And I think the decisions that we make may not vary that much between games. As soon as you add another player into the mix, and especially with 4 players, I think it will play out in much different ways, because then there will be more of these available. There will be more people jumping on them that will make them more expensive, and you can see what people's plans are and try and work out all of these things. But the bigger issue for us is not a fault with the game whatsoever. This game, more than anything else, is about planning. It mentions it so many times in the rulebook, that especially for winter and things, you need to have planned ahead for this. And basically everything, the tasks, the planned work as well. Not only do you have this power stored up for the future, you say You can't do it the round that you pay for it. You say which round you're going to do it. You can do it 1, 2, or 3 rounds in the future. You need to, you need to say right now, how many rounds are you going to be ready for this? And then when it comes to that round, you have to be ready for it. You can't put it off for a round or anything. You have to have planned meticulously in this game, which I know for many, many people is going to be a fantastic thing about it. It's what adds so much weight to the decisions, because you know that this is such a big deal. A wrong turn in this game can really, really set you back and ruin you for the rest of the game. If you completely messed up a round and ended up with nothing and everyone else got ahead, the game can leave you high and dry. And again, not a fault of the game. That is the type of game. It is designed, I think, to be a cutthroat, make sure you are doing your best at all times. Make sure you are observing what everybody is doing and what is going to be available to you, because anything can happen. And if you haven't got your wits about you, then you will just get left in the dust in this game. And while, as I said, it's not a fault of the game, that is going to be a fantastic, massive plus for a lot of people. For us, it was too stressful, and yeah, for the amount of planning and thought and work that had to go into every little thing, it didn't feel rewarding enough for us based on the amount of planning that we had to put into it. And again, it's just a personal thing for us of we just didn't like that, the amount of thought ahead that was needed for it. It is it's a great part of the design, and as I said, for many people that is going to be a fantastic thing about it, because you need to be thinking as far ahead as the winter that's coming, because you're only going to get one worker and you can't hire more workers, so you need to get those orange tokens so you can get mill workers. You need to have bought the saws in advance if you want to use sawyers. You need to have gotten the rafts in advance, and you can't buy them, you need to pick them up along the path. And if you just didn't get one, you can't transport wood in the winter phase, so tough luck, you're probably going to be using your guy to just get more wood, which is what we have to do, because we always forget something in planning. And there's always, I should have bought a food there. And how specific the rulebook is about when you get the wood, when you transport the wood from your wood pile to your sawmill. Decide now, is it going into sawing or sale? Because as soon as you have made that decision, tough luck, you cannot change your mind at the end. And it says at the end, if you've still got wood in the sawing section, tough luck, that's gone. If you've got extra wood in the firewood storage section, that was just wasted. You made a bad decision, you didn't plan right, and that's it. And again, I wouldn't want to change things about that. That is just inherent to the game and not something that we enjoyed that much. But I can certainly appreciate what a great design Lignum is. And I know for a lot of people that are looking for a very quite a heavy game that is that wants meticulous, really, really well thought out planning, this is going to be fantastic for you. But as always, you can watch the playthrough and see for yourself if it will be a game for you. But that is Lignum. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and I'll see you for the next game. Bye.